is Aaron Hobson with Rhinebeck School of Music, and in this lesson we are going to do more basic music theory. So we're going to talk about intervals, and intervals are the basic building blocks for everything that you play in music. If you don't understand intervals, you cannot build chords, you cannot build scales, you will not understand how any of that's constructed. So again, whether you play guitar, ukulele, or bass, this lesson will apply to you. All right, so we're going to talk about intervals. And intervals are really the measurement of distance between two notes. That could be a very long distance, or that could be a very short distance. So we're going to go over each interval. I'm going to talk about the distance from the root note that you would have to go to form that interval. And then we're going to talk about a song that relates to that interval so that you can kind of, have an understanding of how it's used in music. So we're going to start with the smallest intervals. So the smallest interval in music is a minor second. So I'm going to relate everything from my F note here. And if I start on this F and I go 1/2 step, that is called a minor second. So F to F sharp, G flat, that's a minor second. And that is related to the Jaws theme. It's very dark. It's a very dark interval. So now you can think of minor second every time you hear the Jaws theme. After that, we have a major second. So I'm going to go a whole step from my F root. So F to G, that's a major second. Happy birthday to you, Frère, Frère Jacques. So Frère Jacques, happy birthday. That's a major second. So we have minor second, major second. And you notice that the minor intervals are very dark and the major ones are more uplifting and happy. Now we're going to go in order. We're going to learn thirds. So we left off on this third fret with G. Now we're going to go a 1/2 step higher from F to A flat, which is on the 4th fret here. That is a minor third. So it is a whole step and a 1/2 step away from your root note. If anybody's played the minor pentatonic scale, the reason why it's a minor pentatonic scale is because you have a minor third in the beginning there. Some other songs you can relate it to. Brahm's Lullaby. So that first interval is a minor third, E to G. Or jingle bells, jingle bells, jingle. That's a minor third from E to G. So that's minor third, and then if you go a 1/2 step higher than your minor third, you have a major third. So again, that's a little happier. If you've ever played a major blues, root third, that's your major third. When the Saints Go Marching In, oh when, that's a major third. It's a Small World, it's a small world after all. So those are just a couple songs you can relate. So you have minor third, which is a whole step and a 1/2 step, major third, which is 2 whole steps from your root. So now we're going to move on to the fourths. So if we kept going from this F and we left off on our major third here on the 5th fret, if you went one higher, you'd have B flat. So that's a pretty long distance to travel on the guitar. You can also play that B flat here because these are the same notes. These are both B flat. And here's a cool trick about knowing fourths on the guitar. The guitar is tuned in fourths, right? E to A is a fourth, A to D, D to G. G to B here is a major third, so that's why everything gets weird between those two strings on the guitar. And then B to E is a fourth. Same with the ukulele and the bass. They're all tuned in fourths, right? So if you are on a note on the top string and you go down to the next string, that's your fourth. If you were here to here, that's a fourth. Here to here, that's a fourth. Between these two strings as well, and these two strings, and even these two. The only place it doesn't work is between the G and the B strings because that's where your major third, that's where your guitar is tuned in a third. So, here comes the bride. That's a very popular way to remember how to play your fourth. Also, Amazing Grace. Amazing Grace. That's a fourth. Then after the fourth, we have a very special interval. This is called, has a lot of names. We're going to call it a tritone because it is literally 1 whole step, 2 whole step, 3 whole steps from your root. So if it went from here to here, you can really see how far that distance is. But you can also play it 1 string down and 1 fret over from your root note. So they've nicknamed this the Devil's Interval. It was banned from the church. Has a very dark sound. Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath. Has the tritone in there. It's also called an augmented fourth or a diminished fifth. So you're going to learn 2 new terms in music. To augment something means to make it larger. So when you're augmenting your fourth, you're making it larger by 1 fret. When you diminish something, you make it smaller. So when I'm diminishing this fifth, I'm making it smaller by 1 fret. So it's the same interval: augmented fourth, diminished fifth, tritone, Devil's Interval. Now we're going to move on to the fifths. So if I start on this root note and I go from here to here, that's my fifth. 1 whole step, 2 whole steps, 3 whole steps, and a half step. So it's a pretty far distance, but we're going to play it from here to here because we can. Anytime that you have a root and you go over 2 frets and 1 string down, with the exception of the strings that we talked about, you are playing fifths. So what does that look like? If you've ever played rock music, that's a power chord. So power chords are often notated F5, G5, A5. So they're really just a root and a fifth, sometimes an octave. But that is how you're going to remember what your fifth is on the guitar. It's really just a power chord. Some other songs you might know: Star Wars. That first interval is a fifth. Twinkle Little Star. So that interval, that's a fifth. So now we're going to talk about an augmented fifth, sharpening that fifth, which is also called a minor sixth. And that's also a very dark interval. So remember, when you augment something, you make it larger by 1 fret. So if I augment a fifth, I'm bringing the fifth up a fret. Major sixth would be the next one, which we'll get to, but if I flat that sixth, I get the same result. That's a minor sixth, or that is a augmented fifth. Now we're moving on to the major sixth. So again, if I tried to count it from here up to here, that's a pretty far distance. That's 1 whole step, 2 whole steps, 3 whole steps, 4 whole steps, and a half step. But I could also play it from here to here. So listen to this. The NBC Theme. That's a good way to remember your major sixth. Also, if you're ever playing a power chord shuffle in blues, what gives it that sound is going from the fifth to the major sixth and back. And that is really part of that blues sound. Dashing through the snow. Dashing through the snow. Right? That's another major sixth interval. So now we're going to get into the sevenths. So if I start on this root F and I go all the way to here, that's a minor 7, and I've traveled a long distance to get there. But I could also play it here on the D string first fret. That's my minor 7 from here to here, from F to E flat. So Away in a Manger is a good example of that. Away in, that's a minor 7th right there. So minor 7th, then we have major 7th. Now look how far this distance is. That's pretty far, from F all the way up to the 12th fret. So you can see how many steps it took to get there. But you can also play it here. here's my F, and then here's my E on my D string 2nd fret. So that's a major 7th. Take on me, take on me, take me on. That's a major 7th root. So that's a good way, aha. Good way to remember it. Aha, take on me is the first note in that chorus is from a root to a major 7th. So that's a good way to remember that. So you have minor 7 and major 7. And last but not least, we have the octave. So the octave is the same note, just a little higher. So from here all the way to here, that's a long distance to travel, but octaves line up on the guitar. From the E string, you go down 2 frets and down to the D string, you play those together. And you often hear these in jazz where people are like, but even Jimi Hendrix used them. You know, rock, alternative music, a lot of people use octaves. Good way to remember. Somewhere over the rainbow is a perfect example of an octave. So when you start to get into these intervals that are really far from your root, you can also count backwards. So say you needed to find a major 7th from F. Well, find your F and just count back 1 fret, and that's your major 7th. If you want to find a minor 7th, you can go to your octave and count back 2 frets, and that's your minor 7. 3 frets back, that's your major 6th. So instead of trying to count really high up into those further intervals, you can start counting backwards. So this is a lot of information that's going to take a lot of time to absorb and apply. And the way that we're going to start applying it is by learning the scale formulas and chord formulas for scales and chords, and that's how you start to apply it. We're also going to talk about the circle of fourths and the circle of fifths and how to use that as a memorization tool. If you need to transpose, if you need to write a song or a chord progression, if you just need to find your fourths and fifths in a pinch. Because these smaller intervals, they're very easy to find, the seconds and the thirds. When you start to get to the fourths and the fifths, there's little techniques for remembering those. And then once you get into the 6th and the 7th, sometimes counting backwards is a little bit easier than counting forwards because they're so far from the root. But we're going to get into more of that and why it's so important to understand these intervals, because we're going to actually apply it to music theory.